We have Dennis DeSantis from Ableton Live. He is going to show you something you have never seen before, the most amazing controller I've actually ever seen in my life. Let's give a big round of applause for Dennis, please.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming. Maybe more people will come in. Bring your friends. My name is Dennis DeSantis. I'm the head of documentation for Ableton. We make a program called Ableton Live, which is music production and performance software. And we also now, with our partners Akai, make the new Ableton Push, which is on the surface a conventional kind of grid layout controller that's optimized for live session view. But what we really think of this as is an instrument, a new way of creating music from scratch. Being able to program and play beats, being able to play melodies and harmonies in real time in a very new way, which I'll show you as we go on. Complete control over sounds, so loading sounds and manipulating the parameters of sounds, and then finally sort of putting all that stuff together into a song. So, I mean, what you'll notice here is that I have a computer attached, but I'm not looking at it. The lid's mostly closed. And the idea with Push is that we wanted a way of getting your hands into music making again, using the power that you get from a computer, but without the sort of pain of having to stare at a screen and feel like you're checking your mail. So everything that you need to do to make new music, you can do directly from the hardware. So let me show you how that works. We'll start with how we deal with beats. So when we have a drum instrument selected, which happens automatically as soon as you've selected it using these track select buttons on Push, the pad grid configures itself here to deal with playing drums. So this set of 16 pads here, can you guys see in the, great, is for real-time playing, the kind of traditional 16-pad workflow that companies like Akai made so famous. So, give me 1 second here. So that's these 16 pads, and we still have a whole range of pads to go. The next set of 16 pads over to the right is for setting the length of your loop. So each of these pads corresponds to 1 bar. So you can create loops that are from 1 to 16 bars immediately. This top row of 32 buttons is a step sequencer, and it dynamically adjusts depending on the last instrument that you played. So if I play a hi-hat, for example, it's set now to be step sequenced via these 4 rows of buttons here. The resolution of the step sequencer is determined by this column of buttons. So I can choose between quarter notes all the way up to 30-second note triplets. I usually leave it at 16ths. So we have 32 16th notes for a total of 2 bars. And I'll just start by entering some hi-hats on offbeat 8 notes. So as you can see, this moving green playhead shows the position that we're at now in the bar. Now I'll select the kick drum. Maybe I'll record this in real time. So I'm punching in. And it loops at the end of the bar. Now, if I want to quantize that, I can, let's say I want to quantize that to something like 75% or so. I can adjust the quantization resolution, and now I can press the quantize button and automatically adjust my playing so that it's somewhere, hey, how you doing? So that it's somewhere in between what I played originally and a perfectly quantized set of 16th notes. Now I'll put some backbeats in. And maybe I'll quantize that too. So I can punch out of recording now, and this just keeps going forever. So we've shown step sequencing, real-time playing. Now there's also a per-note repeat function, also made popular by some of the 16-pad hardware that these guys make. So when I turn on our repeat mode, now I'm repeating whatever pad I'm holding down at the rate controlled by this column of buttons. So again, I'll do 16th notes, and as I vary the pressure on the pads, it changes the volume. I can also do per note swing. So this encoder here is automatically set to control swing for either the whole pattern if I'm recording in real time, or for just the pad that I'm pressed down. So I can turn this way up to something crazy, maybe back down to something a little more musical for this tempo. And notice the rest of the pattern is playing in straight 16ths, but the pad that I'm pressing down is now swung a little bit. And when I want to record that, I just punch in. And I can vary the pressure. And now punch out again. I'll turn repeat mode off. Maybe I'll punch in a couple more real-time things. Quantize those. So that's a pretty quick way of making a beat. So let me stop playback for that. Now one thing I wanted to point out, that these encoders are all touch sensitive. So if I tap the top of the encoder, I can see the amount of swing that I'm recording without varying it. So I'm just pressing on the top very lightly. Now I'm going to switch to a different track by using these cursor keys here. And now what I'm playing is a pitched instrument. In this case, it's a piano. So we have an entirely new way of representing pitches on this pad grid, which is some way similar to what you can do with a piano, but with a whole bunch more flexibility. So we have two ways of dealing with pitches. Currently we're in what we call in-key mode. I'm going to switch this to chromatic mode. And you can see the coloring changes on the pad grid to show you information. In chromatic mode, you can think of this as being very much like a piano. These blue pads represent the tonic, or the root of the key that we're in. The white pads represent the other notes that are in the scale. And the unlit pads represent the black keys, the keys that are out of the scale. So we move to the right in half steps, and up in perfect fourths. So what's interesting about this way of playing, whether you're an instrumentalist or not, you can learn this like an instrument and really get a new way of playing pitches. Let me just show you a sort of simple example of what's interesting about this note layout. Here's the melody to giant steps, the Coltrane standard. So that's cool. I mean, it's no easier or harder necessarily to learn a pattern like that on this instrument than it would be on a piano, with one really important exception. Because of the way this pad grid is laid out, we don't have certain notes that are higher or smaller than others like you would on a piano. So to transpose a pattern to a different key, I just have to move my hand over, similar to what you do when you shift register on a guitar. It's very different than playing a piano, because now to play in a different key, I don't have to learn a new fingering, I just have to move my hand to a new pattern. So I played this here before. If I want to play it a whole step higher, I just move my hand over two pads and play exactly the same pattern. So that's cool. That's a really interesting way of sort of dealing with transposition on this instrument. But that's just in chromatic mode. If I switch now to our in-key mode, I've basically thrown out all of the notes from the pad grid that aren't in the key. So now I can't play any wrong notes. The blue pads are still telling us what the root of the key is. The white pads are the other keys in the scale, and now there are only blue and white pads. So every note is in key. Again, I can do this kind of transposition game where I can shift my hands around to play the same pattern in different places. For example, once I learn the fingering for a triad, I can play all the diatonic triads using exactly the same fingering position just by moving my hand around the grid. You can't do this with a piano. You really need to sort of learn how chords work on a piano. To play a major scale here, I play 3 to the right and then shift up 1. But that's to play any scale. So the way I change scales is using this set of green buttons up here. If I want to play an E minor, it's exactly the same fingering pattern. And if you're a purist, if you come from a piano background, which I actually do, your first glance at this might be to think, oh, well, they're taking the work out of playing an instrument. And we don't see it this way at all. What you find when you play this is it's actually tricky. You have to learn it the way you would learn any instrument. What we've made easier is these kinds of transpositional changes, but you still have to spend time with the instrument. And we find that as those of us who've had these for a little while play it more, you get better and better at it, the way you would at any other instrument. Okay, so that's a quick look at how pitches work on this. What's also interesting is that for playing sort of non-traditional harmony, like harmony built in fourths, for example, it's all just stacked in the column. So you can kind of shred on this instrument without really spending a lot of time. to learn it. So we've seen drums, we've seen working with pitches. Now let's take a look at how we deal with getting different sounds. Is that me feeding back? Okay, sorry, I'm too many things to think about. So when I press our browse button here, can you still hear me? Okay, cool. When I press our browse button, I'm now in a view that allows me to deal with loading new instruments. So we've been playing this piano sound for a while. Let me switch here. I can use these encoders to dial in different types of sounds, and then use another encoder to pick a different sound. When I land on one I want, I press this green button to load it. And now, once a new sound is selected, these encoders at the top are immediately mapped to control sort of fundamental parameter changes for that sound. So I can dial in a different type of parameter or a different type of timbre just by adjusting this pattern. Let's say I like the sound that I have and I want to make new music with this. I can start playback again. It starts the drum pattern we had before. And when I'm ready to record, I just punch in. And then I punch out. Now, I probably recorded a clip that's too long because I didn't get out in time, so I can enter our clip mode and change the length of this clip to 2 bars instead of 3. Maybe quantize it to fix the timing a little bit. Now maybe I want to create some variation in the timbre over time. Well, we can change the nature of the sound. All those changes that I was making to these encoders to shape the sound, I can capture those parameter changes, again, just by punching in. And when I'm done, I punch out again. So now the sound is breathing and changing in time too. Now I'll switch to a different track, which has a bass sound. And again, our clip is too long, so I'll dial this down to 2 bars. You can also specify ahead of time the length of the clip that you want, and I'll quantize that. So notice this whole time I haven't been looking at my computer at all. Everything I'm doing is happening in the computer. The computer, Ableton Live, the software, is the engine for all of the sounds and the entire structure of the song so far. But everything I do from here. And this kind of hands-on way of making music from scratch is way more interesting than staring into a screen the whole time. Okay, so far I've put together a handful of clips. Now I'm going to switch out of what we call note mode and into session mode. And you can think of this as kind of zooming out. So now the pads no longer represent individual notes, but they represent the patterns themselves that I just played. So now, if I press one of these colored pads, what I'm actually doing is triggering one of the loops that I just played. We'll start with the drums. And live waits till the beginning of the next bar if I press a button, so I'll trigger the bass loop. And then finally punch in again. Now I have a set of material here that I already recorded before, and I can launch a whole collection. What we were using as quantization resolution buttons before, we now use to launch a whole scene. And if we can switch the view to live, so everything that you see here, I built from using push alone. When you've done this kind of work from push, and you've started to put together these patterns of new material, you can then move to the computer to do the kind of stuff that computers are really good at, the kind of detailed editing workflow that you can't do from this instrument. So push is really very simple in a lot of ways. It's designed for making beats, playing melodies and harmonies, loading and tweaking sounds, and arranging patterns together. But Live is a complex software designed for complete audio editing, music production from the bottom to the top. So the way we envision this workflow is that you start here with your hands on the instrument. And once you have materials put together in a way that's interesting, you move over to Live and do the kind of stuff that digital audio workstations are great for. So that's a quick overview of the Ableton Push instrument and how it interacts with Ableton Live 9. Does anybody have any questions?